Wyoming Territory, 1886. Clara Reed stood in the middle of Red Creek's Main Street, with one man gripping her arm and another holding her wrist. The wind drove dust against her skirt. A loose thread hung from her torn sleeve. Sheriff Tom Pike stood 6 paces away, with his badge catching the afternoon light. I did not move. Neither did the ranchers under the mercantile awning. Nobody wanted trouble with Wade Voss. Clara's father, Ben Reed, kept his eyes on the boards beneath his boots. His fingers were locked around her wrist, so tightly the skin had gone pale. "Pa," Clara said. Bond's grip weakened, but he did not let go. Then a horse stopped at the far end of the street. A tall roan mare stood in the dust, with a weathered rider in the saddle. The man looked past Eli first, then the sheriff. His face carried the hard quiet of someone who had seen enough violence to know exactly when not to reach for a gun. Jack Hale had ridden into Red Creek, intending to water his horse and continue out after a bounty. Instead, he watched Eli Voss tighten his hand on Clara's arm. That was enough. Jack swung down from the saddle, slowly, giving every man in the street time to see that his hands were empty. "Let her go." Eli gave a short laugh that died almost as soon as it began. "This is family business, mister." Jack glanced at Clara's torn sleeve, then at Ben's hand around his daughter's wrist. Family business usually doesn't need a sheriff watching it. Tom Pike shifted his weight. Metal clicked softly at his belt. "Still," he said nothing. Eli's jaw hardened. "She's promised to me." Clara looked at Jack then, not with relief, not with gratitude, with the sharp, measuring look of someone deciding whether this stranger was another man about to choose for her. Jack saw it and stopped one step short. I did not reach for her. I did not tell her what to do. He only looked at Eli. "Take your hand off her." This time Clara spoke before anyone else could. "You heard him." The street went still. Eli's fingers loosened, and from beneath the shadow of a porch across the road, Wade Voss watched without blinking. Jack noticed him too. That was the moment he understood the man holding Clara was never the real danger. 20 minutes later, Jack Hale stood beside the livery trough, while the roan drank in slow, careful pulls. Behind him, Red Creek had found its voice again. Low talk moved under the boardwalk awnings, carried by the wind, then broke apart in the dust. Jack ignored it. I was tightening the mare's cinch when Ben Reed came toward him, with his hat crushed between both hands. "You don't know what you stepped into back there." Jack looked at the man's pale knuckles. "Then tell me." Bond swallowed once before he spoke. 2 dry years had cut the Reed herd nearly in half. Red Creek still ran through their land, but lower every month, thin enough now that cattle had to crowd the banks where grass used to grow. Feed cost more than Ben could manage. Calves brought less than he needed, and when the ranch came short on cash, Wade Voss had been there with money and paper. Now the note was due, $1,100. Jack's eyes narrowed. "And the marriage clears it?" Bond looked away. "That's what Wade offered." A woman's voice came from behind him. "Offered isn't the word I'd use." Clara had pinned her torn sleeve closed. The bruising on her arm was already beginning to darken, where Eli had held her. She stopped beside her father, but left a careful space between them. Bun lowered his head. "He says if you marry Eli, the debt disappears and we keep the ranch." Clara looked at Jack. "What he means is Wade gets what he wants without having to foreclose." Jack glanced toward the north end of town, where the Voss property lay beyond the dry grass and low hills. "What does he want?" Pun hesitated. Clara did not. "Control." The word landed harder than any explanation. Jack had heard men use debt that way before. A signature first, a favor second. Then one morning, a man woke up and discovered that the land still carried his name, but nothing on it truly belonged to him anymore. Jack reached for the saddle horn. "I'm staying tonight." Pun looked up fast. "You should ride." "I probably should." Clara's eyes sharpened. "You don't owe us anything, Mr. Hale." "No." Jack checked the street once more. At the far end, Eli Voss had disappeared, but Wade Voss had not. I was still standing beneath the shade of the bank porch, watching the livery from across the dust. Jack rested one hand on the saddle. "I said one night." Clara followed his gaze. Wade slowly turned and walked inside. Neither of them believed one night would be enough. A night became 2, then 2 became 3. Jack Hale never announced that he had changed his mind. He simply paid the livery boy for another measure of oats, carried his blanket out to Reed Creek Ranch, and began watching the north pasture after dark. Clara noticed. She said nothing. On the 3rd night, the coyotes stopped calling. Jack was lying flat on the porch roof, with his rifle resting across his forearms. When the silence changed, a horse could hide its shape in darkness. It could not hide the weight of 4 riders, moving slowly through dry grass. They were coming across the pasture instead of using the road. Jack eased the hammer back. Below him, the ranch house remained dark. The first shot struck the corral post. Wood exploded beside the horses. A gelding screamed and slammed against the rails. The second round tore through the empty feed trough. Bun Reed came through the front door in his nightshirt, with a rifle clutched in both hands. His barrel shook badly enough to catch moonlight. "Stay inside," Jack called. Another shot cracked across the yard. Jack fired once. The water barrel beside the lead rider burst open. Cold water flashed silver in the darkness. The man jerked his horse around. Jack fired again. The second bullet struck dirt beneath another horse's front feet. The animal reared. Its rider hit the ground hard. "Next one goes higher," Jack said. High did not shout. High did not need to. The 4 men hesitated, then turned north. Jack watched until hoofbeats faded beyond the pasture fence. Only then did he climb down. Clara stood in the doorway, holding a lamp. Her face was pale, but the flame in her hand was steady. Bun came forward with the rifle, still trembling. Jack took it gently from him. "They came because of me," Ben said. "No," Clara answered. "They came because Wade thought fear would finish what debt started." Jack looked toward the broken corral post, then toward the dark line of Red Creek beyond the pasture. Clara followed his eyes. "They'll come back." "Yes." "With more men?" "Maybe." She studied him. "Then why do you look relieved?" Jack wiped dust from the rifle stock. "Because Wade just made a mistake." Bun frowned. Jack looked north. "A man who believes the law belongs to him doesn't send riders across a pasture after midnight." I handed the rifle back to Ben. "He sends the sheriff at noon." Clara's expression changed. Not hope. Something harder. Understanding. Jack looked at the bullet scar in the corral post. Wade Voss is afraid of daylight. And somewhere beyond the dark pasture, a horse was still running north. Rafe Dunn reached Voss Ranch before dawn. Wade Voss was already awake. He sat behind a broad oak desk, with a ledger open beneath the lamp, one finger resting on a column of figures, as if the numbers mattered more than the 4 men standing ashamed before him. Rafe removed his hat. "Hale was waiting for us." Wade did not look up. "You were told to frighten an old rancher." "We did." "You came back frightened." Rafe's jaw tightened. Across the room, Eli Voss stood near the window. "I had heard enough." "You sent them to shoot at the Reed place?" Wade closed the ledger. "I sent them to remind Ben Reed what happens when a man forgets what he owes." "That isn't what you told me." Wade finally looked at his son. "I told you the ranch had to be settled. You told me marrying Clara would save her father." "It will." Eli gave a short, bitter laugh. "She looked at me in that street like she'd rather lose the ranch." Wade leaned back. "People say many things before they understand the price." Eli stepped closer. "What price?" For the first time, Wade's patience thinned. He turned the ledger toward his son. Numbers filled the page. Feed costs, cattle losses, notes on neighboring spreads, water, always water. Red Creek is dropping. Wade tapped the page. "If August comes hot, I lose cattle. You own more wells than anyone in the county. Wells fail." Wade's finger moved to another line. "The Reed place controls the last dependable stretch of creek I don't hold." Eli stared at him. Then the shape of this plan finally became clear. The debt, the marriage, the ranch. The whole thing is about water. It's about surviving long enough to leave you something worth inheriting. "You mean owning everything that can keep somebody else alive?" Wade's eyes hardened. "I mean not watching 2,000 head die because I was too sentimental to take control when I had the chance." Eli looked toward Rafe, toward the mud dried on his boots, toward the revolver hanging at his hip. "This isn't ranching anymore." "No," Wade said. "It's business." Eli stood silent for several seconds, then walked out. Wade did not call him back. South of the Voss place, dawn was beginning to gray the prairie. At Reed Creek Ranch, Clara sat alone. The kitchen table. Ben was asleep. Jack was outside checking the damaged corral. In front of Clara lay a tin box filled with 3 years of bank papers. She had begun looking because something Jack said would not leave her alone. Wade was afraid of daylight. Near the bottom, she found the original note. She read the amount once, then again, $400. Clara went still. The paper Eli had quoted in the street had said, 1100. She reached for the lamp and noticed the ink was not the same. Clara carried both papers to the window and held them against the first gray light. The older note was worn soft at the folds. $400. The newer copy was cleaner. 1100. The extra numerals sat darker on the page, almost black beside ink that had faded brown with age. She heard Jack step onto the porch before she saw him. He came in carrying a broken corral rail over one shoulder. Clara laid the papers side by side. "Close the door." Jack did. Bun appeared in the hallway, still buttoning his shirt. Clara pointed at the table. "What did you borrow from Wade 3 years ago?" Bun stopped. 400. Not 11? His face changed before he answered. "No." Clara pushed the newer note toward him. Bun stared at it. For a long time, nobody spoke. Outside, one of the cattle coughed near the creek. Jack picked up neither paper. He only leaned closer. "Different ink." Clara nodded. Somebody changed the amount. Bun lowered himself into a chair. "I signed the first note." His voice sounded older than it had the night before. "I never signed that." Clara looked at her father. "You were ready to give me to Eli over $700 that may never have existed." Bun flinched. "I thought I was saving the ranch." "You were saving it with me." Jack turned toward the door. "We can get you out before Wade knows you found this." Clara looked at him. "No. He sent 4 armed men here." "I know." "Then you know what happens when he feels cornered." Clara folded the original note once. "That is exactly why I'm not running." Jack's jaw tightened. He had expected fear. What he saw instead made him uneasy. Not because Clara was fearless, because she was afraid, and had decided fear would not choose for her. "I want his ledger brought into daylight," she said. "I want Reverend Cole there. I want Tom Pike there, if he has the courage to wear that badge in front of witnesses." Pun looked up. "And if Wade refuses?" Clara slid both papers into the tin box. "Then everyone gets to watch him refuse." Jack studied her for a long moment. The fight had changed. A gun could stop a rider in the dark. It could not prove what ink meant on a page. Clara closed the lid. "I'm not trying to escape a wedding anymore." She met Jack's eyes. "I'm going to make Wade Voss explain why my father's $400 debt became $1,100. For the first time since Jack rode into Red Creek, he had no answer ready. By dusk, the wind had dropped enough for Clara to hear the brush moving through the roan mare's coat. Jack stood inside the corral, working dust from the horse's shoulder in long, even strokes. Clara came out carrying 2 tin cups of coffee and held one through the rails. Jack took it. For a while, neither spoke. The mare leaned into the brush. "She trusts you," Clara said. "Animals are easier. Because they don't ask questions? Because they ask the right ones." Clara almost smiled. Then she looked toward the house. "My father thinks you saved us. I stopped a bad afternoon." "That isn't the same thing." "No." The answer came too quickly. Clara watched him. "You've seen this before." Jack stopped brushing. "My sister was 6 years younger than me." Clara waited. "There was a man who held paper on my family. I was 2 states away on a bounty when he decided paper wasn't enough." Jack looked at the mare instead of Clara. "I came back 4 days too late." The corral went quiet, except for leather creaking against the fence. Clara did not tell him she was sorry. "That's why you stopped in the street." "Maybe. And why you keep deciding what danger I should be allowed near." His hand stopped again. Clara set her cup on the fence post. "My mother died during the first hard drought I remember. I was 11 when Pa sold half the herd to keep the rest alive." She looked toward the thin, dark ribbon of Red Creek. "I learned early what it feels like when somebody else decides what you can afford to lose." Jack turned toward her. "Wade will come harder now." "I know. You could ride south before he does." Clara's expression cooled. "There it is again." Jack said nothing. "You stepped into that street because Eli was choosing for me." She held his gaze. "Don't think protection gives you the same right." The words landed clean. Jack looked away first. Then back. "What do you want to do?" Clara's face softened slightly. I want Wade's books opened in front of witnesses. Jack nodded once. All right. Hoofbeats sounded beyond the yard. A rider stopped at the gate, tossed a folded message toward the porch, and wheeled away. Jack picked it up. Wade Voss expected the wedding to proceed Sunday. The county had been invited. Clara read the note and folded it carefully. Good, she said. Jack looked at her. Good. If Wade wants witnesses, we'll give him witnesses. Sunday morning came bright and hard over Red Creek. By 8, wagon tracks already scored the road north toward Voss Ranch. Bun stood beside the oldest Reed mare with the tin box tucked under his coat. His injured pride seemed heavier than the papers. You can still stay here, he told Clara. She tightened the strap on her saddle. So Wade can tell everyone I was too frightened to face him. I'm trying to keep you alive. Clara looked at him. I know. That was what made the answer hurt. Jack waited near the gate, his roan saddled and ready. He had checked his rifle twice and said almost nothing since dawn. When Clara mounted, he rode beside her rather than ahead. For the first mile, the only sound was leather, hoofbeats, and wind moving through dry grass. Then Mick said, Once we ride into that yard, Wade controls the ground. Clara kept her eyes forward. He already controls too much. There'll be men there who owe him money, and men who know what $400 looks like. Jack glanced at her. You're afraid. Yes. The answer came without shame. So am I. That surprised him. Clara looked over. Jack's face was calm, but one hand had closed tight around the reins. I've seen crowds turn faster than gunmen, he said, and I've seen badges decide they belong to whoever pays the bills. Clara looked at Ben riding behind them. If we turn back now, nothing changes. Jack nodded once. That was all. By the time Voss Ranch appeared on the rise, the yard was already crowded. Wagons stood wheel to wheel along the fence. Horses filled the hitching rails. White cloth hung from the barn doors and moved in the wind like surrender flags. Clara slowed. For one heartbeat, Jack thought she might stop. Then Ben came alongside. His voice was quiet. I should have asked what you wanted before I ever signed anything. Clara looked at him. The apology was late, but not useless. She reached under his coat and touched the tin box once. Then stand with me now. Bun straightened in the saddle. Jack looked toward the barn. Sheriff Tom Pike stood near the entrance. Reverend Cole was beside him, and Wade Voss waited beneath the white bunting as if the morning already belonged to him. Clara swung down from her horse. The moment her boots touched Wade's ground, there was no ordinary life left to return to. She took the tin box from Ben. Then she walked toward the barn doors. Conversation died when Clara entered the barn. Nearly every face that had watched her on Main Street was there again. Only this time, nobody could pretend they had not come to see what Wade Voss intended to do. White bunting crossed the rafters. Lanterns hung from fresh hooks. Reverend Cole stood beneath an arch of cottonwood branches, his hat held in both hands. Eli waited near his father. I did not look like a groom. He looked like a man standing beside a verdict he no longer trusted. Wade stepped forward. Clara. She stopped 10 feet from him. Mr. Voss. His eyes moved to the tin box. You've caused enough spectacle. No, Clara said. You did. A murmur moved through the barn. Bun stepped beside his daughter. His hands shook as he opened the box. He pulled out the original note and held it where Reverend Cole could see. 3 years ago, I borrowed $400. Wade's expression did not change. Bun lifted the second paper. This one says $1,100. The shaking in his hand eased. $700 appeared somewhere between then and now. Sheriff Pike shifted near the wall. Clara saw it. So did Jack. Bun turned toward Wade. Bring out your ledger. Wade's jaw tightened. Careful, Ben. I'm being careful. Bun held up the older note. That's why I kept this. Reverend Cole stepped closer. If the figures are correct, Mr. Voss, the ledger should settle it. Wade did not move. The silence stretched. It was the first honest answer he had given all morning. Rafe Dunn took one step from the wall. His hand dropped toward his revolver. Jack moved before the leather cleared. He caught Rafe's wrist, turned it, and the gun struck the barn floor. Jack released him immediately. No shooting needed. Rafe's face burned. Across the barn, Eli looked at his father. Is it true? Wade stared at him. The ranch had to be secured. That wasn't my question. It's business. Eli's face changed. Something inside him finally broke clean. You called it mercy. He walked away from Wade and stopped beside Clara. I did not touch her. I did not ask forgiveness. I won't marry a woman over a debt you built out of ink. The crowd stirred louder. Wade looked at Ben's papers. Rafe looked at the revolver lying near the post. Jack saw both looks at once. Rafe lunged for the gun, and above him, one of the lantern hooks began to sway. The lantern struck the post before Rafe's hand reached the revolver. Glass shattered across the barn floor. For one breath, nothing happened. Then Lame climbed the white bunting. It moved faster than anyone expected. Dry cloth caught first, then old timber. Smoke rolled beneath the rafters. As the crowd surged toward the two doors, Jack kicked Rafe's revolver away and turned toward Clara. Move, she did, but not toward the nearest exit. Bun had been knocked against a hitching rail. By the first rush of bodies, Clara forced her way back to him. Pa! Jack reached them as another section of bunting fell, burning from above. I grabbed Ben under one arm. Clara took the other. Together, they pulled him toward the side door. Then a gunshot cracked inside the smoke. Pun jerked hard. For an instant, Clara thought he had stumbled. Then, blood spread across his shoulder. Rafe stood several yards away with a second pistol in his hand, his face more frightened than angry. Jack turned toward him. Clara caught Jack's sleeve. My father. That choice lasted less than a second. Jack could chase Rafe, or he could help Ben. I chose Bun. They dragged him into the yard as the first roof beam groaned overhead. Clara dropped to her knees. She tore a strip from the damaged sleeve of her dress and pressed it hard against the wound. Hon gasped. Keep pressure. Jack's voice was calm, but his hands were black with smoke. Behind them, people were still pouring from the barn. Clara looked up. The west door. Several men near the front had forgotten it existed. She shouted until they heard her. Use the west door. The crowd split. The pressure at the main entrance eased. Reverend Cole stumbled out coughing. Sheriff Pike followed with 2 children ahead of him. Then, part of the roof collapsed. Flame climbed into the morning sky. Men formed a bucket line from the stock trough. Women carried blankets and water. People who had stood silent on Main Street were suddenly moving together. Wade Voss stood beyond the smoke. His barn was burning. His son was beside Clara. His ledger had never appeared, and half the county had heard Ben's accusation. Jack looked at Wade. Wade looked back. No gun was drawn. No threat was spoken. None was needed. For years, Wade had survived because people were afraid to say what they knew. Now too many people had seen the same thing, and there was no barn large enough to hold that truth anymore. Reed lived. The bullet had passed high through his shoulder. It spared the bone badly enough to save his arm, but not enough to leave it unchanged. For weeks, he moved carefully. For the rest of his life, cold mornings would remind him of the Voss barn. The wedding never happened. Reverend Cole refused to perform it. Sheriff Tom Pike took statements from the people who had been there, not because courage had suddenly found him, because too many witnesses were standing beside him now for silence to remain useful. Wade Voss kept his ranch. Hunt kept his cattle. He kept his house on the rise north of town. But he no longer kept Red Creek afraid in the same way. Every new note, every altered figure, every piece of land he tried to claim would now be read twice. Eli left his father's ranch before the month ended. I said little before he went. Clara did not ask him to stay. At Reed Creek Ranch, the work continued. Fences still needed mending. Cattle still needed water. The creek was still low. Survival did not become easier, simply because one lie had been exposed. Clara took over the ranch books. Every evening, she sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open beneath the lamp. Her handwriting was small, careful, permanent. Jack stayed until Ben could walk the yard without help. Then one Tuesday before sunrise, Clara found him saddling the roan. She stood at the fence with her arms folded against the cold. So this is it. Jack tightened the final strap. There's a bounty 2 counties west. You always leave before people can thank you. Usually. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Neither of them had spoken about the corral, or the coffee, or what might have happened if Jack had been a different man. Different woman. Some things were too honest to turn into promises. Clara rested one hand on the fence rail. Let her go. Jack looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. That wasn't a threat. No. Clara understood now. It was a fact. Jack mounted. For a moment, he seemed ready to say more. I didn't. Then he rode west. Clara watched until the roan became a dark shape against the morning prairie. The wind slowly erased the hoofprints from the road. Behind her stood Reed Creek Ranch, still dry, still struggling, still theirs. Clara turned back toward the house. There was a ledger waiting on the table, and this time, the hand deciding what happened next would be her own. Thank you for staying with Clara and Jack through the dust, fire, and hard choices of Red Creek. If this story of courage, justice, and a second chance on the American frontier stayed with you, please subscribe and join us for more Western stories where love is earned, survival has a price, and every choice leaves a mark. And tell us in the comments, would you have stood beside Clara when she walked into that barn, knowing there was no turning back? Disclaimer: this is a fictional Western romance story inspired by life on the 19th century American frontier. Characters, events, dialogue, and dramatic situations are created for storytelling purposes. Historical settings and cultural details are researched for authenticity.